All right, Marginal Gains listeners, I have a real treat for you today. Longtime friend and co-worker, compatriot, a number of ways we could put that at times, off and on over.
Comrade. We're
Comrade,
comrades.
yeah. Over, I'm feeling old to say, over like 20 years. My good friend Alan Lim, you may know him as the Scratch Labs guy. Or the guy who was the face of power meters in this country for, I mean, a whole bunch of years. I know I've seen those videos about 10,000 times at trade shows. But Alan has done it all from, he's a PhD to the Scratch Labs guy. I mean, holy cow, like I see your product at Target. I mean, you haven't just made it. You're at Target, man. Welcome to the show.
I know, it's really weird. Talk about logistical mayhem. 1,400 doors.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable. Yeah. I'm so happy for you. Well, I always like to start in the beginning. As our listeners know, I don't pre-write questions. We just make it up as we go. But let's help the listeners start off. How do you land in cycling? I think you were a kid, right?
Yeah. First, I appreciate that we're just going to shoot the poop, or never mind. Anyways, yes, I started cycling in Los Angeles, California. I'm an immigrant. My parts are from China. I was born in the Philippines. I was programmed in Los Angeles, California, which is not seemingly a great place to learn how to ride a bicycle or to ride. But it turns out, hashtag LA sucks for riding, which means that it's actually an amazing place for cycling, especially given the weather and kind of the access to dirt roads and trails and things of this nature. And my kind of first real impression of cycling was the 1984 Los Angeles Games. And what a tear it was for the U.S. team. Connie Carpenter, Alexi Graywall, Steve Haig, Nelson Vales. These were legends who came into the forefront of my mind. I was so inspired. That, of course, then dovetailed to other icons in our sport, including American Flyers, the Coors Classic.
Oh, yeah.
Greg LeMond and his battle against Bernard Hinault in '85. LeMond going on to win the Tour in '86. And so as a young kid, feeling maybe like many young cyclists, like they didn't fit in elsewhere, I found a lot of comfort, a lot of solitude, and a lot of confidence in being able to go on these long bike rides around Los Angeles, come home, and not even tell anyone where I was or what I did. Right? It was deeply personal. But the structure that I had came from two places. It came from, one, the Boy Scouts of America and the cycling badge.
Yep.
And all of a sudden there was this curriculum. You had to learn how to change a flat tire. You had to learn how to maintain a bicycle and change a headset. You had to go on a bicycle ride of at least 60 miles. You had to go cycling and camp overnight and then come back, right?
Right.
You think about those requirements in the Boy Scout manual around cycling, and that's like modern day gravel bike packing.
It's so true. I love the timing here is perfect. I am our troop merit badge counselor for cycling, and we are doing our 50-mile self-supported ride next weekend. So I am living, and I have to bring in, which is so funny that Nick Legan said exactly the same thing. He came into the sport really falling in love with it during the merit badge earning. As a Boy Scout, and so that's two of our of our podcast friends coming in from Boy Scouts. So well done, Boy Scouts.
That's right, and I think it does actually say that as a young kid you can learn a lot, you can take on a lot as long as there's structure and curriculum, and maybe that's what's really missing. As well as I think what the Boy Scouts gave me was the structure of adult volunteers and supervisors. Right. And I was going to say the second thing that made cycling happen for me, besides the support of my parents, was volunteers. There were a lot of riders in my community who would just show up and volunteer. For example, I grew up close to the Rose Bowl in Southern California, and there was a man who showed up every Monday night at the Rose Bowl with a clipboard, and he would just time the kids every week doing mini time trials around there. And he would keep records of where you were so that if you showed up again, he could properly handicap everybody. And he kept these records of how fast we were going over the years. And he was part of the Montrose cycling club. And it was volunteers like that allowed me to learn about the sport and be supervised and effectively not even tell my parents where I was, but just go and roam the streets of Los Angeles on a bicycle. But as much as, I think of myself as this rebel and this kid who was just riding around by myself, I wasn't. I was going on group rides that had all of these adults who were yelling at me to hold my line and to do this and do that and giving me feedback and critiquing me and, effectively coaching me.
No, that's beautiful. I'd love to hear you say that. I mean, we are a communal sport, even though I think so many of us love to think, like you talked about, the solitude of finding places and getting lost and all that stuff we love about the sport. But we all came in with mentors and we've all been told to hold our line.
Yeah, exactly.
Been made fun of fixing our own flat on the side of the road.
I remember I don't know why I did this, but I was just feeling like, I'm a badass and whatnot. And I was just like maybe a 14-year-old kid. And I painted on my airbrushed on my helmet, FU, basically, the F word U. And I showed up at the group ride. I was like, yeah, I'm so cool. And, this guy Kirby took me aside and he just sat me down and was like, this is not appropriate. You can't do this. And you need to go home and you need to paint your helmet. And I was like, shays.
Wow.
Didn't even get included on that ride. I got sent home.
Yeah.
I repainted my helmet.
That's awesome. Good way to go, Kirby. I think we can all find some. No, that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I think of I was fortunate, like you too, to have those mentors and those people, and I think it does as I've gotten older. Certainly, you really feel that that desire to try to give something back, right? Yep. And I think that's a beautiful thing when that can come full circle.
Yeah, we have to volunteer to keep this sport going, right? That's what makes it work.
Yeah, oh, that's fantastic. So you're a kid riding in LA, and I love the hashtag LA sucks for riding, because I feel like every time you talk to like a Taylor Finney or somebody, they can't shut up about how good the riding is in LA.
That's right.
And I haven't been out there in years. It's like, man, I have not had this LA cycling experience yet. So I think I need to with the gravel bike. But
there are pockets, right? There's like,
well, I'm looking like
either from the Santa Monica Mountains all the way to the Verdugo Hills, all the way out to Pasadena, all the way out to Mount Baldy. There are pockets, and you can find them. And I was lucky enough to live in just outside of Glendale near Montrose, and at the base of the Verdugo Hills, at the base of the Angeles Crest Forest. And, in hindsight, some of the best riding in California.
Yeah, oh, that's awesome. So let's take it from that 14-year-old you and college, and you're still interested in cycling, and you end up on this or I guess help us understand your PhD path to.
Yeah. So a lot of it was influenced as I began to get more formalized into wanting to perform on the bicycle and to bike race. And I was on a junior team that included guys like Antonio Cruz, Freddie Rodriguez, my brother Almeric, my cousin John, Halden Morris, Sean Cronkite, a bunch of us, and Brian Provo. We were tearing it up and having good success, at the national level. And I became really interested in sports performance, which led me to find a coach. And I was really lucky to find Chinese Filipino coach who spoke the same Chinese dialect, Fujian, as my parents did, which I think closed the gap between them thinking that I was cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs and now having somebody who spoke their own dialect who could explain that sport was important for a young person's life, right?
Wow.
And Wig was an outlier. One, and I look back at it now because he was Asian American Filipino. There weren't a lot of us in the sport back then. And number two, because he had both a medical degree as well as a PhD. And finally, he had gone to the Olympics for the Philippines.
Wow.
So talk about a role model. And what Wig always did was he effectively made me, challenged me to write my own training programs, and then he would edit them. And so this relationship took fold of one of like a writer and an editor, where you never write an essay totally by yourself. You write your words, then you send it to somebody, and then they spell check it for you. They edit, they try to understand what you're saying. They check your tone, diction, detail, and they send it back. And they're just like, whoa, your topic sentences suck. You have no rationale. You're not setting this up to a proper conclusion. I don't get your thesis or your point. And then you go back and you work on it again. And that's how Wig and I iterated on training programs together, right? He's like, send me a draft and I'll edit, right? And talk about awesome, because he would ask me like, why do you have this work on this day? I'm like, well, because I have to study for the SATs, or I want to ask this girl out to prom or whatever. And he's like, that's awesome. Okay. Like, I understood my life well enough that I could lay the foundation, and then he could then chime in. But he always gave me little science experiments to do, and, you know, taught me to be critical as a scientist. And that led me to go to the University of California, Davis, to study exercise science. It developed in sequence with my passion for bicycle racing, my passion for discovery, my curiosity, and my interest in the scientific method. And I was lucky enough that there was that major, both, you know, at a lot of the Cal States, as well as Berkeley, as well as Davis. And I ended up at UC Davis. It was at UC Davis that I joined the collegiate cycling team, which is one of the best bicycle racing community experiences I've ever had in the sport, right? And in 1994, the women's team didn't have a coach, so I volunteered to coach the team, just because I needed practice talking to girls. And we ended up winning the collegiate national title, which felt like the biggest thing in the world. We took the title away from the University of Colorado at Boulder, and they then asked if I would come and coach the team at CU Boulder. So I got into graduate school at CU Boulder to continue studying exercise phys, and started coaching collegiately at CU Boulder. And so for me, the coaching history was having a great coach, having an opportunity to get an education, having an opportunity to coach my peers, my friends at the collegiate level, and then going on to get my master's degree to coach at CU. We continued to succeed at CU Boulder. And when I finished my master's degree, Roy Nickman hired me to be the resident coach at the U.S. Olympic Training Center for the resident national team. And holy cow, I mean, I owe Roy so much, right? Because he was the first person to really give me a shot at being a quote unquote professional coach. And, you know, sometimes I gist that we ruined a generation, because I didn't know what I was doing. I was only 23 years old at the time. And, you know, the dogma at the time was find them young, bring them into one place, one facility, bring them up, much like the Soviets would or the Chinese would. But Americans don't function that way, right? Yeah. We need to be big fish in little ponds to have our communities behind us in order for us to achieve greatness. Especially for young teenagers, it can be very, very difficult to imbue them with a sense of self when they're constantly in competition with others.
Yeah, so, interesting. And so what years would that have been that you were?
That was 97 that I was resident coach at the OTC. And, you know, realizing, I mean, I'll tell you a story about that time. I was so excited about what we were challenged with. And I was so excited by the young kids that we were bringing in from all across America, 15 to 19-year-olds, basically, taking over their high school programs and bringing them in one place where we could really, really train them. And the first evening when I went through the dorms, I remember seeing that everyone was posting up a little newspaper article from their local paper about how they had made it to the Olympic Training Center. Shelley Oram, you know, gets invite to follow her Olympic dreams. You know, Ryan Kelly was part of that. Nicole Reinhardt was part of that. Marissa Vandervelde was part of it, Christian's sister. And they all had these newspaper clippings that they were proudly putting up on their cork boards. Maybe 6 or 7 weeks later, I was going back through the dorms and I noticed something was different. And what was different was they had all taken down those articles. And I asked one of the kids why. And she said, well, we all felt embarrassed.
Mm.
Everyone has the same story.
Yeah.
We're not really all that special. And I realized at that point that we're doomed.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
So
yeah.
I ended up leaving the training center, less than a year later. And I went to Nepal on a research expedition with my old master's advisor. I realized that, kind of feeling like I had really failed this group of kids and failed as a coach. So I needed to get away, and this invitation to just kind of get lost in Eastern Nepal studying load carriers and porters, seemed really cool. And I went out there with Bill, and over the course of that summer, fall researching, fell back in love with science. And he offered me a spot in the PhD program at CU Boulder, but I wanted to study not load carrying, or extreme environmental physiology as we were doing, but I wanted to study professional cycling, and I wanted to study the demands of cycling. And I had it in my mind that we needed to build these power meters to do so, and that I wanted to be a classic physiologist who studied stress response physiology or dose response physiology. How do you associate a given stressor, say training, with our physiological adaptations, right? What's the relationship? How do we meld in genetics, other variables? How do we design truly optimal and great training plans? That was what I wanted to do my PhD work on. And I think Bill, as encouraging as he was like, look, kid, there's no money in it. You can't write a grant for this. NSF, NIH, they want to study diabetes. US Army, yeah, maybe they might be a little interested, but it doesn't necessarily apply to soldiers, right? So I said, how about I make you a bet that if I can find the money for this research, that you'll let me do my PhD at CU. And so he was like, all right. So I lived in a 1985 Toyota van. I met up with my friend Ingrid Alonji, and we started brainstorming proposals and ideas. And she helped me craft a bunch of letters. And I literally wrote hundreds of letters to corporations telling them what my vision was and asking them to support my PhD. Long story short, Celestial Seasonings, Mo Siegel, yes. And they underwrote my doctorate.
Wow.
And in exchange, I would help them to develop a professional women's cycling team, namesake, Celestial Seasonings Professional Women's Cycling Team. And so I started directing this pro women's cycling team for Celestial Seasonings as they paid for my PhD work, which is really neat, right? And they let me follow this vision.
Yeah.
I met Chris Zigmont, Gerhard Pawelka, Jesse Ambrosina, who were with eTune, making the power tap. And they brought me on board to help them start to think about this as part of my PhD work. That went belly up, bankrupt, and they sold the intellectual property to Chris Fortune at Sarah Cycling Group, who decided to continue to support my PhD work and kept me on board to help really codify and make the power tap work. And that's how I then became, kind of in cahoots with building what was the first American-made power meter, right? Yeah. And that power meter formed the entire basis of my PhD work, which, in hindsight was like, wow, that was novel work. It seems normal now, but at the time it was novel.
I mean, it's changed everything. I mean, not just most things, but literally everything about everything. I give you credit all the time for saying, your work really allowed Aero to happen. From my point of view, right? Because we were trying to sell Aero to people for years, and nobody was buying it. And we don't ride in wind tunnels. I can't feel it. And it was those early power taps, and actually we sold it finally to Bjarne Riis in 2000, I think 1 or 2000 for the 2002 season using SRMs because they were in Europe
Yeah.
and that's what we
Yeah.
could get. But I mean, being
Yeah.
in that moment, seeing the kind of like it click in people's brains, like, oh, we can measure this. Like there's a tool and we could, and I think it was you opened the door in my thinking from a language perspective that if we could just had like that, the lingua franca of efficiency
Yeah.
and speed was the watt.
Yeah.
And once we had
Yeah.
watts, we could all talk in the same way. And it was just like the dominoes just began to fall.
Yeah. Those equations, though, for using a power meter to establish aerodynamic drag were not developed by me. Do you know who they were developed by? We just applied them in this context.
Oh, was it Martin?
No, goes back further.
No, I don't know
Martin
that.
being the physiologist at AIS.
Yeah.
Dave Martin. No, it was not Dave Martin either. It was actually Eiffel of the Eiffel Tower. So his first job and how he got into steel was he had to figure out how much fuel locomotives or trains needed. And in order to figure out how much coal would get a certain massive engine a certain distance, right? He had to figure out the aerodynamic drag and the rolling resistance of trains, right? And he did that by pulling trains with a scale to measure the force, right? And developed something called the tractive resistance equation, which allowed you to get drag and rolling resistance on a flat ground by knowing the force it took to move an object. And those equations could be then applied using a power meter to get aerodynamic drag and rolling resistance as well.
That's beautiful.
Wild, eh?
That's really beautiful.
Yeah. So
and
Eiffel.
Now I want to see the scale.
Eiffel.
I want to see the setup for pulling a train.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I have to Google around on that because I just love the visual there. Yeah, that's fantastic. Holy smokes.
Yeah, so we actually wrote an article based on Eiffel's work. We did, some work at Altoona with men and women because it was the only race at the time where men and women raced exactly the same course, the same distance, and got paid the same prize money. So that was a really interesting study. We did some cool stuff. It was fun.
I'll say. I mean, you guys revolutionized that side of the sport, and as I've said a million times on this podcast, I am no physiologist, and my interest in knowledge stops hard when it gets to like the human side of things. But I mean, the groundwork that you laid there, I mean, really just changed everything for us from how we thought about it, how we sold it, how we marketed it.
Yeah, thank you.
I always just love running into you at places at the wind tunnel or the trade show or the tour and and getting your perspective from that other end, right? Because you're thinking about the in my world, okay, this guy's got to make 400 watts for an hour, right?
That's right.
For my math to work,
which is so crazy, right? Because if you consider that maybe the human machine is at best 25% gross mechanically efficient, that means metabolically they have to produce 1600 watts of power, which means that 1200 watts gets wasted as heat, which means that 400 goes to the bicycle, which means that the human body has to somehow deal with somebody shoving a 1200 watt toaster up their butt, turning it on and not melting over the course of an hour.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's a piece of the equation and I first learned this from you years. I mean, I think of this all the time, like, like the gains to be had from being able to cool the thing down. I mean, obviously if we're talking about a car engine, it seems obvious, but I never thought of it in humans. And God, what was, you did the hand cooler? I think of that all the time.
Device. Yeah, that was a device out of Stanford where you put a vacuum on the hand and it opened up this area in the hand called the venous anastomosis. And most of the transition from the vascular space from arteries to veins gets conducted through a capillary bed, and the capillary bed can close or open, right? And so, if you put cold ice on the skin, it'll eventually turn red because those capillary beds are constricting, right? And blood flow is ceasing, and that area of skin ends up turning red as there's a decrease in blood flow, or white to red. In the hand, in the cheeks, there aren't capillaries that shut. And so you can put something cold in your palm and you won't get the vasoconstriction you normally do on other parts of your body. You put a slight vacuum on that hand, now you have an area where you can release a huge amount of heat. And so the hand is a really valuable spot for thermoregulation because you don't get that clamping of vessels. You get consistent output of heat. If you put ice on the back for too long and you get that constriction, muscle begins to act as an insulator and core temperature actually goes up. And so NASA was really smart in their solution. They used something called countercurrent flow, right? Or effectively convection. And they had these small tubes with water circulating through them, flowing across the skin, which could pull off heat without ever causing vasoconstriction. And that's what you see in spacesuits. That's what you see in other types of cooling devices now.
Fascinating. All right. Well, I'm glad now you just taught me the reason I have been telling people this for years about why I like to walk around with a cold beer in my hand on a hot day. Like, partly I am just controlling my core temperature. My friend Alan told me so. And now I need a little bit of a vacuum apparently to maximize the effect.
That's right. Or you can buy a spacesuit from NASA.
Or a spacesuit, yeah. The race car drivers. I know in NASCAR particularly, but we work with a number of the teams, and the same technology under the driving suits for a lot of the really hot weather days in the closed cockpit cars.
That's right. That tubed fluid-like system that just pumps circulating water, and the water doesn't even have to be cold. It's simply the movement of water and the high specific heat capacity that water has for absorbing, creating a temperature differential. Right?
Yeah, just taking it out. That's fascinating.
What ended up sticking, though, was the pantyhose, because we started putting ice in pantyhose with the teams I worked for, and that, that changed, I think, the sport the most, because now, at the end of the day, the peloton was finding spent and flaccid hose all over themselves or littered on the runway.
That's so true. That's funny. So I guess that starts to take us up to, and then I begin to see your transitioning and from that world to, I guess, to the world you're in now. And I think the one word that comes to mind is rice. Yeah. And so how did you start bending into this nutrition space and mindset?
I think the nutrition space came from a really, really dark place for me, because when I first was asked to work on the Pro Tour right out of graduate school, it was to go work with Floyd Landis and Phonak, right? And I walked into maybe the peak of the arms race in professional cycling around performance enhancing drug use, and very much was slowly and surely becoming indoctrinated to believe that leveling the playing field, quote unquote, or doping was okay. Because the idea was that, this was the force, and you could either use the force, like Darth Vader did, where it was the dark side, or you could use it like Luke Skywalker did, right? Absorbing the light. And I think that every athlete at the time had this narrative in their head that they were using the force for good, not for evil, right? Yeah. And it was a really dark proposition that I think was largely fueled by the greed of very wealthy men, right? That was fueled by the ability for people who wanted to win to coerce young athletes into believing that this was their responsibility, as opposed to unethical or dangerous even, right?
Yeah.
And for me, I was very, very lucky that indoctrination, uh, you know, didn't last too long. It lasted maybe one Tour de France. And then I was able to get out of that darkness. I was able to get out because of the support of Jonathan Vaughters, who really understood what that was all about. And I think saw me as this, maybe young kid who was just beginning, and that it would be really sad if I was, fully turned, if you will. Gave me an opportunity to work for his young development squad, TIAA CREF. And at the same time, he believed in my ability to make new things happen. And there was this idea from Don Catlin at the UCLA anti-doping laboratory that he had written about many years before, about not using drugs as an indicator of performance enhancing drug use, not identifying the drugs in blood or in urine, but in looking at a biological profile that could be deviated by performance enhancing drug use, and that if there was a deviation in somebody's profile, that would signal, that something was wrong. I'll give you an example. Like, the human jaw does not grow unless you take growth hormone. So if you did a jaw x-ray at the beginning of the year and at the end of the season, if there was a change in that jaw x-ray, it only happened if someone punched you in the face really, really hard, or if you were taking growth hormone.
Yeah, fascinating.
Right? And so I went back to Don Catlin and essentially proposed to him, this idea, and, kind of shared with them all of the BS that I had been through. And this was all, behind closed doors. And he sent me back an email that I think kind of changed my whole entire life and my whole entire trajectory. And that email was a single line, and it was, "This is brave, let's talk."
Wow.
And so with the support of Slipstream and TIAA CREF and Jonathan, we wrote a grant to the World Anti-Doping Agency and used those young kids as our guinea pigs, and that laid the foundation for the biological passport, right? And it was during this time that the reckoning was, and this brings us to Rice. How do you really take care of an athlete? How do you give them a performance advantage if what we are acknowledging to try to do is to ride clean, right? And I think there was a lot of complexity there. One of the complexity points was that we were all still participating in the Omerta because we didn't want to full scale sink the ship that we were trying to save. And that was extraordinarily complex, and still is a complicated and vexing issue for myself. The next issue was understanding that athletes cheat because they feel cheated. So what do you do to make them feel like they've got something better, right?
Yeah.
Better care, better advantage, better aerodynamics. You had to really lay out the math and say, you are still not just competitive, but you're more than competitive. And whether that be a placebo, whether that be real technology, that was what formed the basis of everything in my career, was looking for marginal gains. But the reality was, it wasn't about the marginal gain. It was about solving this big bottleneck of self-belief, right? So if I could bring these, air compression devices from cancer treatment, lymphedema treatment, and say, this compression device will give you 20% better recovery, which was totally made up, and they believed in it. We knew that was good. By the way, that cancer device turned into the Normatex, right?
Yeah, right.
Or if I could sit down with them and say, our analysis of your power output and the aerodynamic savings that we can generate from this analysis and the improvement in training protocol we can make gives you a 15% advantage, and on and on. And this cooling device, and of course, this food that we're making for you, and the fact that you don't have any complaints around gut rot, and that we can make you a better sports drink, and I can nurture you and make you feel cared for. And I really realized that much of that nurturing and mindset happened at the dinner table. And it happened by showing the athletes that as a staff member and as a staff as a whole, that we were willing to go the extra mile to make sure they performed, right? And it signaled to them advantage. And so making 100 rice cakes every morning signaled advantage, because it was the biggest pain in the ass ever, right? But I did it not just to give them this advantage, this performance advantage, but I did it because when I first started doing it, a lot of people on the pro tour gave me shit about it and started stealing my rice cooker and leaving me notes that read, "You don't belong here, Chinaman," or "Get your chink food out of our kitchen," you know, whatever it was. And it pissed me off. And so I was like, look, if the rice cooker is going to become my symbol of resistance, then I am leaning in hard. And I remember even thinking to myself, like, one day, every single team on the pro tour is going to own a goddamn rice cooker.
Rice cooker. You know? I mean, you are beyond famous for the rice cooker.
But you know, that came from an advantage, performance advantage, but also came from anger.
Okay. Right?
It was my tool. My tool of resistance.
Sometimes you need.
I over promoted.
Yeah, but I love. I mean, and I think you captured so much of it in there. But I mean, I think one of the ultimate marginal gains is when you can take a real gain combined with the placebo about that game, right, or just the belief in it. Because placebo is strong, but man, if you can have that similar level of belief and it's real,
that's right.
There's so much power there, and
that's right.
So much of this is just so mental.
That's right.
For these athletes.
That's right. Have you ever heard of the nocebo effect?
Yeah. We actually we covered that in I don't remember what episode number, but and some of the like people presenting at the hospital dying because they think they've overdosed on something that wasn't the thing that they all right. I mean, it's unbelievable. The power.
They think that they don't have what they need.
Yeah.
So if you get something that is a blue sugar pill and you believe it's going to work for you, that's the placebo. But if you see somebody else take a blue sugar pill and you don't know what it is, but you think it's giving them an advantage, it puts you at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a lot of that world.
Yeah, and I hadn't thought of the doping quite in that context before, but you're right. I mean, that's such a huge, it's not just me being better, it's them not having the thing that I don't have.
Yeah, it's me not being worse.
Me not being worse, yeah. I have to say I love that team and that era, and I think JV was so smart, and he used to bring, I mean, the years that Zip worked with the team, I mean, he would invite us into those camps, and no, bring your graphs and your PowerPoint and do this, I mean, and it was, and I have to say, in doing those things, I mean, I feel like I learned a lot of that communication piece and the psychological piece from watching how you did your thing. It was always had such a grasp of what they needed, and how to communicate that to them, right?
Yeah, science and practice. I mean, the nexus point of both being this idea that what you're always trying to do is nurture, right? And you're always trying to find this, I don't know, it might sound cheesy to say, but you're trying to find the point of love that they can all rally around, whether it's a love for the sport, whether it's love for one another, whether it's, a love for the cause or just joy, right? And so it was maybe a Copernican shift that winning wasn't going to make us happy, but finding a way to be happy would allow us to win.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. And it lives out. I think I've been clear on this show before, but I walked away the last couple of years. We walked away from all of our pro teams because I'm just tired of the crap. And but we're still with EF because I just love the vibe and the people and they just run that program in such a different way. I mean, whether it's you using e-bikes to motor pace guys, or I mean, it's just to the no cell phones at the table, right? I mean, it's like all this crazy out there thinking that all the other teams would never imagine. and it's fascinating, and it feels like it has really enabled winning and happiness. I mean, it's
Yeah, yeah, dinner time as sacred was something that I hope I was able to really imbue that organization with. That really started at the 2008 Tour de France, where you were well dressed, you were on time, and we didn't start eating until everybody was there, and that was sacred time for the team, and time that was filled with storytelling and laughter and the breaking of bread, which is so critical. Yeah,
that's
which,
beautiful.
At least physiologically means that you're releasing less cortisol, which doesn't inhibit insulin, which means that you're improving glycogen resynthesis. Right? So you can go back and forth between like the fact that the mind-body connection is really, really valuable and important and meaningful, right?
Yeah. No, I think it's incredible and just so well stated. You've always impressed me. I feel like I have my world and I get up to the edge of your world and my knowledge goes to zero. But every time I talk to you, I'm like, man, like more than half the stuff I know about what I do, and all your stuff.
But you're better at math and you're better at tribology.
Yes. Well, and it's the one, I think my one thing that I'm excited for this interview to admit is, and I think this takes us into your current stage of life, is and I know I think you're a fan of the product, my super secret chain lube.
That's right. I'm a huge fan of this
which
product.
I think you have to know where the sort of inspiration for the name of this product comes from.
Yeah, secret drink mix.
Secret drink mix.
Yes.
And this was totally spawned out of COVID. And so I haven't told this story before, but we had been working on that product for like almost 2 years. We weren't ready to launch it, but I mean, it was, it's damn good. It's amazingly good. And I'm like, I think I can get like another 1%, and I should listen to my mentor, Andy O, used to like, eventually you shoot the engineer, just ship the product, right? Like I should have just listened to that. But COVID hits and we go on a mandatory statewide shutdown and I'm at home and like, oh my God, I'm going to lose my business. There's no revenue. We can't even go to the office. Like we're going to try to pay people as long as we can pay them. But that money only lasts so long. And I'm looking at this giant mixing tank setup that I've got in my garage where we've been doing all this work, and like, let's launch the chain lube. And I get on the phone with Michelle, our marketing person, like make me some labels that we can print for the bottles that we have. I'm going to launch the chain lube. And she's like, what do you want to call it? I'm like, super secret chain lube. And I still have a packet. I still have a packet of secret drink mix that you would have given me. My God, I don't even remember when. And I took a cell phone picture of it. I'm like, something like this. And she did her thing with the logo and put some color on it. And I'm like, I have to be able to print it on an inkjet printer in my basement. And that's how that, right? That is how that product launched. My kids would bottle it, or they would put the label on it. I would bottle it. My son would screw the lid on. And probably the first 1,000 bottles of that stuff we sold, we were like, literally like printing the labels at home and making it. And I was like, someday I need to tell Alan this story.
Oh, it's so great. I love that. Right. I mean, that's business in America, and that's small business in America, and that's hustling and making it work when, people say like, hey, you don't have a shot at this. And I remember when you decided to, acquire the SILCA brand, and I initially thought at first like, whoa, you're freaking crazy because you're leaving such a great position, such a great job, such great security. And SILCA is an old, outdated, nostalgic brand. What are you going to do with it? And I got to tell you, like, I have bought over the last 2 years everything you sell because it's awesome. And because you made everything better. You made everything better.
Oh, well, thank you. Very kind.
Like even your freaking sock and your freaking handlebar tape. Right?
Oh, I love it.
Like,
it makes me smile.
It's like 5 mils, but it's really only 1 mil.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. No, I do
Yeah.
think, and uh, I think, we really strive to make that product that hits that person who's like us, right? That person who's like thinking in like this multi-spatial, like, oh, and what I never thought about, like uh, the, another friend, was like we've been saying damping forever, and we really wanted was not damping, and like
Yeah.
like it's little fun things like that we can discover, and I think in some ways that's so you do super secret, which
Yeah.
I mean, how long did that last? Like that was a
So
year or two
yeah,
before it
I mean,
became Scratch.
I was in this crazy transition, right? And I was in a transition with other friends, Ian McGregor, who was on the TIA craft squad, slipstream squad. He had injury that prevented him from being pro. And I was in the middle of all the BS associated with Lance and Radio Shack, right? Which was really,
Right.
for me, so tough given like, yeah, no good deed goes unpunished sort of deal. Like
Yeah.
wanting to see the biological passport have a full impact on even someone like Lance, right? But it took me out of the sport, and I was very much resigned to literally opening up a Chinese restaurant or something, or like, teaching at some community college, and my life in cycling was over. But these athletes I'd worked with were calling me up and saying, hey, will you make the sports drink for me that you used to make? And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, no, it's a pain in the ass. Like, why would I do this? But I would feel bad because I didn't have anything to do, and neither did Ian. So Ian and I started to make the stuff in a blender, send it off to these riders. We then started, getting more and more athletes calling us. So we started making it in a paint shaker at the local hardware store, McGuckin Hardware. And that turned into Secret Drink Mix, right? It turned into us deciding that maybe we could reinvent ourselves. Maybe we could give ourselves a fresh start. And in that, we wanted a name that connoted a belief system that we could hold on to, because we were so insecure and so unsure about what we were doing. And so the name Scratch came to us because, not just because food and drink is better from scratch, but because of this very American belief that no matter where you find yourself in life, you can always start from scratch. For me, that is what the American dream is about. It is about possibility. It's about, reinventing yourself with hard work. It's every immigrant story of saying, hey, look, I'm not satisfied with where I am right now. I'm going to go and look for better opportunity, So Scratch was a nod to that very heartfelt idea. Labs was a nod to evidence-based problem solving, and the fact that there was real science behind everything that we did, as simple as it was. And our simple business model was, make 100 pounds, put the money in the bank, use the money to make more product, and never spend more money than is in the bank. And we're very, very proud to have been able to now, over almost 10 years now, bootstrap the organization to get to a place where we've always been profitable, we've always grown, we have no debt, and we have a stand to take care of our team and our customers in a very human way that brings us back to what started this whole journey for me, which was Olympism and the Olympic movement and the stand for human dignity, right?
Yeah. No, it's beautiful. It really is. And I just love the way you've and you're, not everybody would know, but I mean, Al, you're so generous with your time. I think throughout my SILCA journey, probably in a dozen different times I've called you with like, who are you using who's your website provider, right? Or I mean, I think I probably annoyed the heck out of you in the early days with some of those things, but you always like take the time and engage, or, you go to Sea Otter and you're working in a food truck feeding people, 8 hours a day. And I just think like, where does he get the energy to do this? But it really shows the ethos I think you tried to build in the brand. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. I think for some time I felt like I had this cross to bear, like I had amends to make for the sport, because I wasn't always candid about what I knew about everything that was wrong in the sport. But, at the same time, I didn't know how to share those experiences without a huge amount of shame.
Mm.
And I also wanted to be very protective of people who I loved and cared for, who I knew made mistakes. And, that wasn't my cross to bear either. Right.
Right.
So, I would say that the omerta was very complicated and something I felt really guilty about, despite the fact that, I wasn't involved in doping athletes. But guilt by association, all of a sudden people are like, you're an a-hole. And,
Yeah.
you think to yourself, well, maybe I am an a-hole. How can I make things better? And so I started to try to live my life based upon a philosophical idea called the prima facie. And the prima facie is this idea that if you have the ability to help somebody, you have a moral obligation to do so. And so I wouldn't do these things for people unless I was asked, right? And when asked, I would then, ask myself, do I actually have the ability to help? And if I did, then I would say yes. But I think it's a delicate thing because I've also found myself saying yes and then resenting the fact that I said yes, and being bitter and being angry and hurting people. Like this weekend at Rebecca's Private Idaho, she fell into some problems with her caterer and asked Bijou and I if we would come up and save the day, if you will. And initially I was like, yes, we can do this. And 3 hours into this service where we made over 1,000 tacos, I am bitter, just like angry. And Rebecca, who was overjoyed with our ability to help, came up to me and said, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "No, Reba, I'm not okay, and I'm so mad at you." And she was like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! Don't put on that on me. You got some issues, boy, that you got to freaking resolve and figure out." And she was right. Like you have to be careful about how you meter yourself out to the world and still, live this kind of prima facie. So it's a work in progress, man.
Yeah. Hey, aren't we all? Right. I mean,
yeah.
I always enjoy catching up with you. I mean, I think of you as my you're as much philosopher as physiologist and just friend that I enjoy. And I really I hope our listeners today, I don't hope, I know that they've enjoyed getting some more insight into you and what's making you tick. And I'm so thrilled for all your success.
Well, thank you very much. I really, really appreciate that. It's fun, right? And there's so much joy to be had in this sport and in participating in cycling and being physically active and, seeking ways to make ourselves and the world better. Right?
Agreed. Nope, I agree.
Yeah.
Love where this started. It started with mentors and paying it forward, and we're ending on joy.
That's right. Absolutely. That's what it's all about, right? And it's the childhood joy of learning how to ride a bicycle for the very first time, right?
Yeah. And sometimes you get that again, right? I love that. I hadn't been on my bike in weeks, and I hopped out the other day and I had a moment where I'm like, oh, this is like the kid joy. You don't get that all the time.
That's right. That's right. So I'm going to make one gratuitous plug on that notion.
Yeah.
For an organization that I'm on the board of called Pedaling Minds, run by Mike Friedman. It's pedalingminds.org, and they teach kids how to ride bikes. So have a look at what they're doing. It's a beautiful, beautiful program. And Mike Friedman, who was on the Slipstream Garmin squad, 2008 Beijing Olympian. I've never seen anyone teach a kid how to ride a bike better than Mike.
I can only imagine. I mean, he is just such a fun, like, I just love him. I can imagine him with kids just being a sight. Yeah.
That's right.
That's awesome.
That's right.
Well, I was about to plug for you, and we will put it down below in the video here, but Alan has a TED Talk about riding his bicycle to what do you call it? The least bicycle friendly place on earth?
Yeah, Denver International Airport.
It's the Denver International Airport. and it's amazing and inspiring. We'll link it below. I think everybody should watch this. It's absolutely worth seeing.
Awesome.
Alan, thank you so much for your time today, and I think we need to have you back to do it again.
Yes, many more things to talk about. Thanks, Josh. Thanks for making some very frictionless and airy and soft things.
Discussion.
Make our
frictionless discussion. How about that?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. All right. Thanks, Josh.
Cheers.